14 minutes. That is how close the U.S. Navy came to striking the most valuable piece of real estate in the Persian Gulf. F-35Cs from USS Abraham Lincoln were armed, fueled, and assigned targets. The strike package was authorized at the theater level. Every military analyst on this platform, every think tank in Washington, every defense correspondent with a security clearance expected the call to go through. Then it didn't. Not because of a diplomatic cable, a nervous call from a European foreign minister, or a UN Security Council resolution, because someone in Tampa ran the numbers. Here's the equation. Destroy Kharg Island, and you win the battle. Destroy Kharg Island, and you lose the war. The math, not the politics, is what this video is about. Start with the geography, because geography is what makes Hormuz the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. At its narrowest point, between the Musandam Peninsula and Iran's coastline near Bandar Abbas, it measures 21 nautical miles across. The navigable shipping channel is narrower, 2 lanes, each approximately 3 miles wide, separated by a 2-mile traffic separation buffer. Every supertanker moving through the strait is squeezed through one of those lanes. No rerouting option. No alternate corridor. You go through Hormuz or you go around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 14 days and roughly $2 million in additional fuel costs per voyage. Iran knows this. The strait is not a military position. It is a choke point built by geology, and Iran owns one shore of it. The mine-laying campaign that closed Hormuz began quietly, as Iran's mine-laying campaigns always begin. The IRGC Navy used a combination of EM-52 rocket-propelled mines, contact detonating, capable of targeting vessels down to 200 meters of depth, and older Sadaf 02 series pressure influence mines that activate on acoustic and magnetic signatures from passing holes. Intelligence assessments put the active mine count somewhere between 80 and 130. The exact number is unknown. That uncertainty is itself part of the strategy. You cannot clear a minefield you cannot fully map. With Hormuz closed, approximately 20% of global oil supply is frozen. Lloyd's of London has suspended marine war risk insurance for the entire Persian Gulf basin. Supertanker owners are rerouting around the Cape, adding weeks to delivery timelines. Brent crude has moved from $76 to $112 per barrel and is still climbing. That is the environment when CENTCOM's targeting cell begins building the Kharg strike package. On the surface, the logic is completely airtight. Kharg Island sits approximately 25 kilometers off Iran's southwestern coastline in the northern Persian Gulf. It handles roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, 5 to 6 million barrels per day at full capacity. The terminal infrastructure includes 9 sea island berths capable of loading the largest VLCCs in service, 28 above-ground storage tanks with a combined capacity of 20 million barrels, a network of submarine and surface pipelines connecting to Iran's interior fields, and a hardened offshore loading platform rebuilt after significant damage in the 1980s. Destroy Kharg and Iran's oil revenue drops toward zero. An economy already under maximum sanctions pressure collapses within weeks. The IRGC loses its primary funding base. Iranian leadership faces a domestic crisis that forces negotiation. The mine-clearing operation gets funded, the strait reopens, oil markets stabilize. There is a historical precedent every analyst was citing. Operation Praying Mantis, April 18, 1988. The U.S. Navy destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms, sank 2 IRGC frigates, and disabled a third during a single day of operations in response to Iran mining the strait. Iran's military response after Praying Mantis, muted. The economic pain registered within months. Tehran signaled restraint. The template is exactly why the Kharg strike package was assembled. Then one analyst ran a number nobody wanted to see. The strike package is ready. The F-35Cs are 14 minutes from release. And the number that stops everything is $187. $187 per barrel of Brent crude. Sustained. The economic modeling CENTCOM's logistics planning teams were running against the Kharg scenario, kept producing the same result. The coalition damage threshold was not $130 per barrel, not $150. The figure that breaks the tanker escort coalition is $187. And every model that included a full Kharg neutralization campaign produced that number or higher, sustained over 6 to 10 weeks. Here's the equation that produces it. When Kharg burns, Iran loses its primary export terminal. But the global oil market does not care about Iranian production losses in isolation. It cares about the combination: Iranian production losses, plus ongoing Hormuz closure, plus the perceived duration of the conflict. Those three variables compounding together drive the price past every analyst's ceiling. $187 per barrel is not a wartime price. In peacetime, that number signals a global recession. In a coalition logistics context, that number ends the coalition. Here is why. The U.S. Navy cannot sustain a Hormuz mine clearing and sea lane patrol campaign alone. The operational requirements include continuous tanker escort rotations, commercial vessels moving through progressively cleared corridors under naval protection, cycling every 8 to 12 hours. That requires surface escorts, mine countermeasure vessels, maritime patrol aircraft, and the logistics tail to sustain them all simultaneously. The tanker escort rotation through 2026 depends on active participation from 6 NATO allies: the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. These are not symbolic flag contributions. These are actual MCM vessels, mine countermeasure ships, plus P-8 maritime patrol aircraft and surface escorts actively sharing the operational patrol burden. Without them, coverage density falls below the threshold required for safe tanker transit. At $112 per barrel, those 6 allies are under economic stress. Their energy import costs are elevated. Their defense ministries are fighting finance ministries over the cost of extended naval deployments in a distant theater. The coalition is strained but holding. At $187 per barrel, the price that follows a Kharg neutralization campaign, the math collapses. Germany imports roughly 2.3 million barrels of crude equivalent per day. At $187 per barrel versus a pre-crisis baseline of $76, that is an additional $253 million per day in energy import costs. Annualized, that figure approaches $92 billion, exceeding Germany's entire declared defense budget for 2025. An economy absorbing that kind of energy shock does not simultaneously fund an expeditionary mine-clearing deployment in the Persian Gulf. It pulls its ships home. Run the same calculation for Italy, Spain, the Netherlands. A Kharg strike does not just hurt Iran. At the price level a Kharg campaign produces, it dismantles the coalition the Navy needs to sustain the operation through 2026. The strike that wins the battle loses the war. That is only the first layer of the problem. There are 2 more. The second layer is time. Kharg's destruction is not an event. It is a process. Iran's offshore loading infrastructure can be damaged in a single strike package. It cannot be fully neutralized in one pass. The island has hardened storage, underground pipeline networks, and a redundant loading platform on a separate jetty on the island's eastern side. Praying Mantis in 1988 inflicted real damage on Kharg. It did not eliminate Kharg as a functional terminal. Full neutralization requires a sustained bombing campaign. Multiple strike packages over days, possibly weeks, against a hardened and defended target in Iranian territorial waters. Every additional day of that campaign is another day at or above $187 per barrel. The third layer, the one that closed the argument. Destroying Kharg's export capacity does not destroy Iran's ability to lay mines in Hormuz. Those are operationally separate capabilities, funded through different budget lines, operated by different units with different logistics chains. The IRGC Navy's mine warfare program is not funded by oil ministry export revenue on a cycle short enough to matter in a weeks-long campaign. The mines already in the water are already in the water. The mine-laying vessels are already forward deployed. Kharg's destruction would hurt the Iranian treasury over months. It would not disarm the IRGC mine-laying force in the next 72 hours. Iran can keep Hormuz mined indefinitely while Kharg burns. The targeting cell was not looking at the wrong target. It was asking the wrong question. The wrong question: how do we hurt Iran most? The right question: what strike package degrades Iran's Hormuz confrontation capacity per dollar of second-order damage to our own coalition? Those are not the same question. The answers point to completely different locations on the map. Type equation in the comments if you see what CENTCOM saw when they stood down that strike package. The strike did not go to Kharg. It went somewhere else entirely. And where it did go is what this video is actually about. 4 IRGC speedboat pens. 1 Khorramshahr 4 missile storage bunker. The radar mast on Forur Island. Total dollar damage to Iran's military infrastructure: $340 million in estimated replacement value. Total strike package cost: approximately $50 million in ordnance, flight hours, and support operations. Total damage to global oil markets: 0. Brent crude did not move on the strike. Not 1 basis point. Here is the math behind each of those targets, because the target selection is where this decision actually lives. The 4 IRGC speedboat pens were not chosen for their symbolic value. They were chosen for a specific technical reason that most coverage of this strike missed entirely. The pens housed Siraj-class fast attack craft, Iran's primary shallow-water mine-laying platform in the Strait. The Siraj is not primarily a combat vessel, despite its armament. Its operational role in Iran's Hormuz doctrine is mine deployment. The vessel carries a modified stern rail system capable of deploying up to 6 mines per sortie, in water as shallow as 15 meters. 4 pens, average of 3 to 4 operational Siraj-class craft per pen. The strike removed an estimated 14 to 16 Siraj-class craft from Iran's mine-laying rotation, at 6 mines per sortie, per vessel, per deployment cycle. Those 16 craft represented approximately 96 mines per cycle that will not be laid in the navigable corridor the MCM vessels are clearing, against the Navy's Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships working at roughly 4 to 6 mines cleared per operational day. That disruption to Iran's resupply rate extends the clearance operation by weeks. The speedboat pens were not a military target. They were a logistics equation written in concrete and steel. Now, the Khorramshahr 4 bunker. This is where the operational planning nearly broke down, and the way it was solved tells you more about modern strike warfare than the actual explosion. The Khorramshahr 4 is Iran's latest generation anti-ship missile, entered operational service in 2022. Range: 700 kilometers. Terminal phase: sea skimming at approximately 3 to 5 meters above the waterline, with evasive maneuvers in the final approach phase. Against a destroyer without active countermeasures engaged, it is a serious threat. The storage bunker identified by signals intelligence held an estimated 14 to 18 ready-to-fire rounds, with associated targeting and guidance equipment. Here is the problem that emerged approximately 36 hours before the strike window. Signals intelligence confirmed the bunker's location with high confidence, but the facility was hardened. Reinforced concrete construction, estimated roof thickness of 2.8 meters. The standard penetration munition for that class of target is the GBU-28, the Bunker Buster. A 4,700-pound laser-guided bomb, carried by B-2 Spirit bombers and F-15E Strike Eagles. USS Lincoln's F-35C aircraft cannot physically carry the GBU-28. The targeting cell had 6 hours to solve a geometry problem. How do you penetrate a hardened bunker with an aircraft and ordnance loadout not designed for that specific task? The solution involved 2 GBU-31JDAM 2,000-pound bombs sequenced on a 0.8-second delay fuse, aimed at the same ingress point. The first bomb penetrates the outer reinforced layer, creating the breach. The second, traveling through that breach, reaches the internal storage space before detonating. The technique is called a tandem detonation sequence. It is not standard employment doctrine for the F-35C, but it is within the aircraft's operational parameters when the targeting geometry is correct. It required precise CEP, circular error probable, performance. The F-35C with GBU-31JDAM delivers approximately 3 to 5 meters CEP. At that accuracy, a tandem sequence on a 2.8-meter concrete roof is viable. Barely, but viable. The targeting cell cleared the method. Both bombs hit within 1.2 meters of the designated ingress point. The bunker's internal structure collapsed. The after-action assessment returned high confidence on mission completion. 14 to 18 Khorramshahr-4 rounds were removed from Iran's A2/AD inventory. At $2.8 million per unit, that is roughly $45 million of anti-ship capability that is not threatening USS Tripoli's MCM detachment in the Northern Strait approach, and then Forur Island. Forur sits at the eastern entrance of the strait, on Iran's side of the traffic separation corridor. The radar installation on Forur provided real-time targeting data for IRGC surface units operating in the southern approach zone. Specifically, it fed fire control solutions to Siraj and Hudong-class fast attack craft that would otherwise be operating on dead reckoning navigation and passive optical sensors in the cluttered maritime environment of the strait. Without Forur's targeting feed, those craft operate with degraded situational awareness. They cannot precisely track the position of Avenger-class MCM vessels working the cleared corridor. They have to estimate. They have to work with wider error margins. The difference between Forur-fed targeting data and degraded estimated targeting for an IRGC fast attack craft engaging a U.S. mine countermeasure vessel is approximately 200 meters of effective CEP. At that degraded accuracy, the probability of a successful engagement against a maneuvering MCM vessel drops from roughly 68% to under 30%. That is not a marginal improvement. That is the difference between a threat and a nuisance. The Forur radar mast cost approximately $12 million to install, calibrate, and integrate into Iran's Hormuz targeting architecture. The GBU-24 Paveway 3 that removed it cost $280,000, a 43-to-1 cost asymmetry, in the Navy's favor. We showed you in the video on USS Tripoli's Hormuz deployment how the ARG's operational geometry creates compounding problems for Iran's fast attack doctrine. What we did not show you then was the targeting architecture that makes that doctrine effective. Forur Island was the eye. The GBU-24 closed it. Subscribe to NavyPoverline. We do not celebrate weapons. We calculate whether they work. Now here is the obstacle that almost ended the operation before the Forur strike launched. And it matters because it shows something about modern military decision-making that the public rarely sees. The Forur radar mast was 340 meters from an Iranian Coast Guard station, not a combat unit. A Coast Guard facility with an estimated 12 to 14 personnel on duty during the planned strike window. Under the existing rules of engagement, any strike producing a probability of non-combatant casualties within 500 meters of non-military personnel required a secondary authorization layer from the Secretary of Defense, not just Theater Command. That secondary authorization was not built into the original strike timeline. The approved package was sitting on a desk in Washington at T-4 hours. The targeting team at 5th Fleet ran the geometry one more time. The F-35C's CEP with GBU-24 at the planned strike angle and altitude 3.2 meters. Blast radius for a GBU-24 against a steel mast structure, approximately 35 meters maximum fragment dispersion. At 340 meters distance with 3.2 meter precision and 35 meter dispersion, the collateral damage assessment produced a probability of personnel casualties at the Coast Guard station of under 2%. That number cleared the secondary authorization within 90 minutes. The strike proceeded. But those 90 minutes existed. The window nearly closed. That detail matters beyond the operational narrative. It shows what modern precision strike warfare actually involves: a simultaneous calculation of military geometry, legal sufficiency, and probabilistic harm modeling, all running in parallel, all required to complete before a $280,000 bomb can be released against a $12 million radar mast. A targeting solution is not enough. You need a legal argument and a probabilistic assessment alongside it. The Forur mast came down. The Coast Guard station was undamaged. The corridor cleared. Here is what we want to know from you. Put yourself in the CENTCOM commander's position when the $187 estimate came across the desk. The F-35Cs are armed and ready. The strike against Kharg is authorized at the theater level, and one economic projection from a logistics planning team stops everything. Do you trust the number? Do you stand down the strike based on a financial model? Comment yes or no, because that decision is not as obvious in the moment as it looks in hindsight. 14 days after the Kharg decision, the first commercial tanker, a Suezmax registered in the Marshall Islands, transited the strait under U.S. Navy escort. Coalition MCM rotations continued. The 6 NATO allies maintained their deployment commitments. Brent crude stabilized at $127 per barrel, elevated, but within a range that coalition economies could absorb without breaking. The equation held. The coalition held. The $187 scenario was avoided. 3 days after that first tanker transit, Iran's state media published a statement from IRGC Navy Command. They were not claiming victory in the conventional sense. They were announcing a new mine-laying doctrine. The new model did not use Siraj-class fast attack craft operating from concentrated forward pens. The pens were gone. The Siraj assets were degraded. Forur Island's targeting architecture was offline. The new doctrine involved civilian fishing vessels, dhow-type coastal traders, modified with concealed mine rails, operating out of dispersed coastal fishing communities along the Iranian shoreline between Bandar Lenge and Jask. Small wooden hulls, minimal radar cross-section, no concentrated infrastructure for satellite imagery to identify, no pens to strike, no single command node to disable. Here is the equation for that model. A modified fishing dhow capable of carrying 3 to 4 mines costs approximately $35,000 to acquire and modify. The SADAF-02 mines themselves run $8,000 to $12,000 per unit. Total capability cost per dispersed mine-laying unit, under $75,000. The SM-6 interceptor, the Navy's primary surface threat engagement round against fast-moving small craft, costs $5.3 million. That is a 70-to-1 cost ratio, in Iran's favor. What this entire sequence shows, from the Kharg restraint to the precision surgical strike to Iran's doctrinal evolution, is how every successful adaptation by one side immediately generates the next problem for the other. CENTCOM made the correct decision. The surgical strike was executed with genuine precision. The coalition held, and the result is a harder problem, not a solved one. Here's a take that will generate some disagreement. CENTCOM made the right call on Kharg, and the institutional default of strike the biggest target should have been corrected a decade earlier. The doctrine of maximum pressure through maximum strikes has failed repeatedly in conflicts where economic interdependence constrains the strike space. The Kharg restraint is not a breakthrough, it is a correction that was overdue. The targeting cell deserves credit. The broader institutional default that had to be overridden to reach that decision deserves scrutiny. The Navy struck the industrial architecture of Iran's mine-laying capability. Iran responded by eliminating the industrial architecture. The new model requires no pens, no radar integration, no concentrated forward deployment. It requires a fishing village and a concealed stern rail. The most difficult adversary to counter is not the most capable one. It is the adversary who continuously reduces the capital intensity of their threat below your cost of response. One detail that stuck with me going through the documentation on the strike decision is the phrase used to justify standing down the Kharg package: second-order coalition effects. That language is bureaucratic to the point of being nearly invisible. It is also a genuine shift in naval targeting logic dressed in the most forgettable possible words. The Navy did not spare Kharg because it was afraid of escalation. It spared Kharg because the geometry of this particular conflict made the most expensive target the most counterproductive one. The optimal strike is not the most powerful strike. It is the strike that changes the adversary's equation without destroying your own. There is a line in the operational record that reads almost like a thought exercise. The target list is not a ranking of values. It is a ranking of second-order effects. That sentence should be taught at every war college on the planet. Will the dispersed civilian vessel mining doctrine change how you think about the next phase of this conflict? Comment doctrine in the comments if you think Iran just turned a tactical defeat into a strategic adaptation. Here is the open question this operation leaves behind. Iran's new dispersed model, if deployed at scale, closes the gap that the precision strike created. 40 to 60 modified fishing dhows dispersed across 150 kilometers of Iranian coastline, operating in a maritime environment populated by hundreds of legitimate civilian fishing vessels, are nearly impossible to preempt without a persistent ISR architecture that does not currently exist in this theater at the required density. The Navy would need continuous surveillance coverage of the entire Iranian coastline between Bandar Lengeh and Yazd. It would need to track individual small wooden vessels among thousands of similar vessels, looking for stern rail modifications that are hidden below the waterline. It would need attribution confidence sufficient to justify engagement under the same rules of engagement framework that required secondary authorization for a radar mast 340 meters from a Coast Guard station. That is not an impossible problem, but it is not a solved problem. And here is what makes it harder. If the Navy engages a modified fishing vessel and the attribution is wrong, if the vessel was actually just a fishing vessel, the narrative CENTCOM worked so carefully to deny Tehran is handed back to Iran in the worst possible way. The civilian vessel doctrine is not just a mine-laying adaptation. It is a targeting trap. The Kharg restraint was the correct decision. The surgical strike against 4 speedboat pens, 1 missile bunker, and a radar mast was executed with a precision that changed Iran's operational calculus without breaking the coalition or the oil market. But what the Navy showed on the day it stood down the Kharg strike is something more valuable than a successful operation. It showed an institutional capacity to choose the right question over the obvious answer. The smartest target is the one you do not hit. What happens when Iran's new doctrine eliminates even that option? When there is no concentrated target to spare and no surgical strike that avoids the civilian vessel trap? That is the question nobody in this conflict is publicly discussing yet, and it is the question we are going to show you next. Subscribe to NavyPoverline. We do not worship the machine, we worship the equation, and the equation just got harder.